This is inspired by a true story. The story I'm going to tell you today is a little different. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I got emotional as I tell it. I couldn't believe it when I heard this story. Isn't a person without a conscience? If you're ready, let's embark on this painful but instructive journey together. My son Nathan's wedding feast. My husband, Vincent, slammed the table, stood up, and looked me straight in the eye. "Olivia," he said, his voice echoing throughout the hall. "It has to end now. There's someone else in my life." At that moment, my heart rate suddenly increased, making it hard to breathe. What had happened on this happy day? Could this have been a joke? No, it wasn't. It was the opening line of a terrifying moment. But that day, everything changed. Everyone froze. Forks hung in the air. Conversations died. 62 guests were witnessing the destruction of my 28-year marriage in a single sentence. "But you don't know the woman he scorned. The woman he thought would remain silent, Vincent. You're wrong." On our son's 26th birthday, we went to Riverside with the love of his life, Elena. She was getting married in the gardens, under crystal chandeliers, in that magnificent venue, filled with the scent of lavender. A group of 62 of us, just family and close friends, had gathered. I was sitting at the head table. To my left, Nathan and Elena, their faces radiant with happiness. To my right, stood my husband, Vincent. But Vincent had mysteriously left just as the salad was being served. I found it strange. Vincent never missed a meal, especially one he'd paid for. The room was filled with laughter. Uncle Marcus was telling fishing stories to the children's table. My sister, Rachel, was already crying as she prepared to make a toast. We hadn't even gotten to the main course yet. Elena's family was taking photos, trying to capture every moment. It was exactly what I'd imagined for my son stepping into a new life, surrounded by love. And we were all there. Then I saw him. Cassidy Monroe, Vincent's 29-year-old assistant principal, almost my son's age, slid into the empty chair across from me. She wore a burgundy dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, perfectly wavy black hair, and a diamond necklace. She looked like she owned the place. My stomach churned. What was she doing here? Vincent hadn't mentioned inviting her. Cassidy caught my eye and waved slightly, as if we were old friends at a coffee shop reunion. The audacity made my hands shake. When Vincent reappeared, his stance was different. He had a confidence I hadn't seen in years. He was wearing his best navy suit, which I had ironed that morning. He didn't sit down. He moved behind his chair, picked up his champagne glass, and tapped it with his fork. The soft ringing sound cut off all conversation. "I apologize to everyone," Vincent said, his voice filling the room. "I have an announcement to make." 62 pairs of eyes turned to our table. Nathan and Elena were surprised but smiling. Perhaps his father was about to make a surprise speech. I felt ice form in my veins. 28 years is a long time. He looked at Vincent long enough to know something was up, and he began to speak. The words hit me like physical blows. Nathan's face went from shock to horror in real time. Elena held his hand tightly. Rachel dropped her fork, and the sound seemed to echo forever. "Olivia," Vincent continued, his voice firm and rehearsed, "there's no point in continuing now. I have someone else in my life." To Cassidy, who raised her champagne glass in a small salute, the silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. In the distance, a waiter dropped a tray. Nathan started to stand, his face red with anger. I raised my hand and stopped him, because in that moment, sitting in front of my family, my friends, my son's new wife, and her family, I realized something profound. Vincent had given me the greatest gift of my life. He had shown everyone who he truly was. For 28 years, I've put everyone else before myself. Let me tell you what that really means. When people hear my story, they always ask the same question: how could you not see that? The truth is, I've seen it all. I just chose to believe the man I married, not the man he's become. When I met Vincent in 1995, I was 28 years old and working in a small accounting office. I had a knack for numbers. I loved keeping people's finances in order, optimizing tax documents, and budgeting. Olivia's consulting services. I had a dream of starting my own business. Vincent was a charming real estate investor who came to our office for tax advice. He captivated me with talk of building a life together, having children, and creating something beautiful. 8 months later, he proposed with a modest ring and a promise to pursue our dreams together. The first victim came during our engagement. Vincent's company offered him a promotion, and for that we had to move 4 hours across the state. "It's temporary," he said, placing his hands on either side of my face. "Just for a few years. Then we'll come back, and you can start your own business." I believed him because I loved him. I said goodbye to my clients, closed the books, and moved to a city where I knew no one. My dream of consulting was put away in a box along with my calculator. Second sacrifice, it came 2 years later, with Nathan's birth. Suddenly, Vincent's career became even more important because we had a family to think about. While he worked longer hours, I stayed home with our beautiful son, focusing all my energy on being a great mother. I told myself I'd go back to work when Nathan started school. But when Nathan turned 5, Vincent's company restructured, his salary was cut, and suddenly my hobby was no longer practical. "We need stability, Olivia," she'd say. Whenever I brought up my job dreams, she'd talk about Nathan's college fund, the mortgage, or maybe when things get better. Things never got any better. There was always another excuse, another financial goal that got in the way of my dreams. So I landed a job in financial services. My attention to detail and my eye for numbers made me indispensable. I became the person everyone trusted with their most sensitive financial information. I processed loans, managed portfolios, and learned all the techniques for tracking money and detecting financial fraud. These skills would later save my life. For 28 years, I supported every move in Vincent's career. I polished his resume when he wanted to switch companies. I planned impressive dinners when he needed to impress potential investors. 8 years ago, when he decided to start his own real estate consulting firm, I co-signed his business loan with my impeccable credit history and worked overtime to cover our personal expenses while his business was growing. Never complained. Not really. I told myself that's what good wives do. They support their husbands. They put family first. They wait their turn. Vincent, I convinced myself that she appreciated my sacrifices, that she saw how much I had given up for Kevin and for herself. Nathan graduated top of his class. I was proud that my sacrifices had helped raise such a wonderful young man. When he got into college with a full scholarship, I felt like those years of putting his needs first were worth it. Vincent's business finally became profitable, enough for us to spend money on luxury items. I thought maybe it was my turn. When I first broached the idea of restarting my consulting business, I was 56. Nathan had graduated from college, and your business was well underway. "I'm thinking of starting my own business again," I said over dinner one evening. Vincent struggled to look up from his phone. "That's great, honey," he said. "But aren't you a little old to be starting over? Besides, Cassidy and I are planning on expanding the office. I might need your help with the books." Cassidy's name came up a lot even then. Her indispensable assistant, so organized and so insightful. I should have paid more attention to the way her voice changed when she spoke of her, but I was too busy being grateful that she trusted me enough to help her company with its finances. The next 2 years doing freelance accounting for Vincent's business, my own dreams catching up as I watched him build something successful. I told myself I was supportive, that marriage was a team effort, and that my time would come. But what I didn't know was that while I was balancing his books and keeping his business profitable, Cassidy was balancing something else entirely. And Vincent had already decided that his future didn't include the woman who sacrificed 28 years of her life to build his. The first red flag appeared before my eyes 5 months before Nathan's wedding, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Statement that shouldn't have been in my regular pile of bills. The card has a $25,000 credit limit. Account holder, Vincent Campbell. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Charges for restaurants I'd never been to. Jewelry stores I'd never even heard of. Weekend hotels in cities Vincent had never mentioned for business. The statement showed a balance of $12,000. Money that hadn't come from our joint account. Vincent didn't even look up from his laptop when I confronted him that evening. "Business expenses, honey," he said in the condescending tone he'd perfected over the years. "Client entertainment, networking events. Cassidy handles the paperwork for refunds." Cassidy again. Always Cassidy. So why the separate card? I sounded more determined than I felt. "Why don't you use a business account? Is it for tax purposes?" He replied softly. "The accountant suggested it. Don't worry, Olivia. You manage the finances. I'll take care of the business." This had to be the end of it. The old me would have accepted his explanation and gone back to blindly trusting him. But 28 years at Hillcrest had taught me that financial secrets always tell the truth. And that statement was full of lies. So I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Vincent's phone was now always face down. He described how he'd been going out to take some calls. He'd suddenly developed a penchant for working late on Friday evenings and weekends. I noticed he was taking longer showers, using cologne on random Tuesday mornings, and spending 20 minutes styling his hair for client meetings. My second discovery came 3 weeks later, when I dropped off lunch at his office. I'd brought his favorite sandwich from the deli down the street. Cassidy wasn't at her desk, and I could hear laughter coming from Vincent's office. A woman's laugh. A genuine laugh. The reception area for 5 minutes, listening to my husband's voice mix with hers, my stomach turning. They weren't discussing insurance policies. They were discussing weekend plans, private jokes, private moments that had nothing to do with work. When they finally emerged from his office, Cassidy's lipstick was smeared, Vincent's tie was askew, and they both froze when they saw me standing there, holding a delivery sandwich like a pathetic wife. "Olivia." Vincent's voice was so bright, so surprised. "What brings you here?" "I brought your lunch." I put the bag on Cassidy's desk. "I thought you might be hungry." Cassidy smoothed her skirt and smiled at me. Pure venom disguised as sweetness. "So thoughtful," she murmured. "Vincent is lucky to have someone who cares so well for him." His words to me made it clear that he thought my job was simple, temporary, and easily replaceable. I smiled back and left without saying another word. But something fundamental had changed inside. I began documenting everything. Every late hour, every inexplicable absence, every time he claimed to be working but passed by and the lights in his office were off. Sometimes I used my lunch breaks to follow him, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. Vincent and Cassidy were holding hands in restaurant booths all over town, kissing in Vincent's car in empty parking lots, shopping together at jewelry stores he'd never taken me to, not even on our anniversary. But the worst discovery was yet to come. 2 months before the wedding, I was checking our joint account when I noticed irregular transfers. Small amounts, 700 here, 1,200. They're being transferred from our savings to an account I didn't recognize. The reference numbers led me down a blood-curdling rabbit hole. At Hillcrest, I discovered that these transfers were made to a secret account Vincent had opened 16 months earlier, an account with both his name and Cassidy's, an account with over $55,000 in it. He systematically stole money from our retirement savings to fund his affair, jewelry for Cassidy, weekend getaways to mountain resorts, down payments on the apartment rented in her name, expensive dinners, designer clothes, spa treatments. He was paying for his new life with the money I had saved for old age. The paper trail painted a picture so clear it left no room for doubt. This wasn't a midlife crisis or a momentary eclipse of reason. This was a calculated betrayal, planned and executed as I lay next to him every night for months, trusting him with my whole heart. Every statement, photographed every receipt, documented every lie. My Hillcrest education taught me that financial evidence doesn't lie the way people say it does. Numbers tell stories that can't be denied or explained. As I sat in my car outside the bank, clutching a file full of evidence that my marriage was a fraud, I felt something I had never felt before. Not just heartbreak or anger, but a cold, clear certainty of what must happen next. Vincent thought he was being clever, covering his tracks with separate accounts and secret credit cards. But he forgot one crucial detail. He was stealing from a woman who had spent 28 years learning how to follow money trails and expose financial scams. He had given me all the ammunition I needed to destroy it. Rather than confront him directly, I decided to let him hang himself with his own rope. My first reaction was to storm into his office, throw bank statements in his face, scream at him, and make him as miserable as I was. But 28 years of marriage had taught me something valuable about my husband. Vincent always despised me. He saw me as the quiet, reliable partner who would never make a scene, never talk back, never do anything that would embarrass him in public. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized that his assumptions about me might be his greatest weakness. As I sat in my car that day, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I wouldn't give him the perfect excuse to portray me as the hysterical, spiteful ex-wife who couldn't bear to trade me for a younger woman. Instead, I would use every advantage I had against him. And the beautiful irony is that Vincent had given me the most powerful weapon of all, the prenuptial agreement. I'd almost forgotten about it until I was rearranging my filing cabinet looking for the deed to our house. There it was, filed between our insurance policies and Nathan's birth certificate. The 28 pages of legal protection Vincent had insisted on after his first marriage ended badly. "I won't go through that financial nightmare again," he had said during our engagement, his expensive divorce from his first wife still fresh in his mind. "This will protect us both, Olivia. It's just smart planning." I signed it without really reading it, trusting him completely, believing our love would last forever and that those legal documents would never matter. Young love can lead you to do stupid things, like sign contracts you don't understand. But now, staring at those yellowed pages, I needed to know exactly what I'd decided 28 years ago. That's when I called Diana Foster. Diana was my college roommate, the smartest woman I'd ever met, and she became a family law attorney specializing in high net worth divorces. We stayed in touch over the years, going out to lunch whenever her schedule allowed and sharing stories about our children and marriages. "Olivia," Diana sounded surprised when she answered my call. "This is unexpected. How are you?" "I need legal advice," I said without preamble, "and I need absolute confidentiality." The silence stretched for a few more seconds. Diana was astute enough to realize that this wasn't just another meeting to update our wills. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said finally. "Bring whatever documents you have." The next morning, I sat across from Diana in her downtown law office and watched her face change as she read my prenuptial agreement. Her expression shifted from professional interest to genuine surprise, almost awe. "Olivia," he said finally, putting the papers down and leaning back in his chair, "do you understand what's going on here? A prenuptial agreement that protects your assets." I replied, confused as to why he looked so pleased. "It's much more than that," Diana said, turning to page 19 and pointing to a specific clause. "It's a fidelity clause. Your husband insisted on adding language that voided much of the property protection if either party committed adultery during the marriage." My heart stopped completely. "What does this mean?" Diana continued, her voice rising in excitement. "If you prove that you cheated on Vincent, this prenuptial agreement is null and void. All those protections he put in place to protect his business and investments will vanish the moment he breaks his vows." The irony was so perfect I almost laughed. Vincent's paranoia about his first wife's infidelity had led him to set a legal trap for his own infidelity. "How much proof do I need?" I asked, thinking about the folder full of evidence in my car. Diana smiled like a shark seeing blood in the water. "Bank records showing she used the marital assets to finance an affair would be perfect. Photos of them together would be useful. Any evidence they lived together or had joint financial accounts would be devastating." I had all of that and more. "There's another thing," Diana said, flipping through the pages. "Because you co-signed on the business loan and worked for his company for free, you're entitled to compensation for your contributions. Combined with the adultery clause, you stand to keep the house, most of the investments, and potentially alimony." For the first time in months, I felt real hope spreading in my chest. "But the point is this," Diana continued, "you need to file first. Don't give him time to hide his assets or prepare a defense. Strike quickly and decisively." That afternoon, I began preparing for battle. I organized every piece of evidence, documented every stolen dollar, and began planning the most important performance of my life. Vincent wanted to humiliate me at our son's wedding. He wanted to flaunt his affair in front of our family and friends. Perfect. Let him think he has all the cards. Make him believe he's bested his simple little wife, who never gave him a moment's trouble. Because while he was planning his big announcement, I was planning something far more devastating. I would let him destroy himself in front of everyone, and then I would hand him the legal ramifications of his choices in a fancy envelope. The best part was that everything I was going to do to him was completely legal, completely justified, and completely his fault. Vincent had underestimated me for 28 years. He would soon learn how costly that mistake would be. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or planning my legal strategy. It was continuing to act like the naive, trusting wife Vincent expected of me. For the 6 weeks leading up to Nathan's wedding, I had to play the role of my life. The faithful partner who suspects nothing, questions nothing, and never thinks of retaliation. Every morning, I made Vincent's coffee just the way he liked it, kissed him goodbye, and wished him success at work. Every evening, I asked him how his day was, listening to his lies about late meetings and difficult clients. When he said he'd work weekends, I made him lunch and told him not to work so hard. My performance required all the self-control I possessed. Home smelling like Cassidy's perfume, I bit my tongue and said nothing. When he forgot our anniversary for the first time in 28 years, I assumed it wasn't a big deal. When he became obsessed with working out and buying new clothes, I admired his dedication to staying healthy. The most challenging part was acting surprised and grateful when Nathan offered to pay for the wedding reception. "I know you're struggling with wedding expenses," she said one evening, without even looking up from her phone. "I'll cover dinner. It is my son's big day." What he didn't know was that I'd already seen his credit card statements. He wasn't being generous. He was planning something. The reception was the perfect venue for maximum humiliation. A captive audience of family and friends to witness my public devastation. "That's very thoughtful of you," I replied, playing my part perfectly. "Nathan will be thrilled. Shall I make the arrangements?" "Actually," Vincent said, and I noticed a slight smile on his lips. "Leave that to me. I want everything to be perfect." "Perfect for what?" I wondered, but I nodded and smiled like the submissive woman he thought he'd married. While Vincent was planning his grand finale, I was organizing something far more devastating. Diana had filed my divorce papers that morning, but they weren't to be served until after the wedding. I didn't want to say anything that would ruin Nathan's day or cause Vincent any public embarrassment. The manila envelope became my constant companion. I carried it everywhere, sometimes touching it from inside my bag to remind myself that I held all the power. Now, inside were copies of divorce papers, evidence of adultery, bank statements showing her theft, and a detailed accounting of every asset she thought she had, protected by the prenuptial agreement. 3 days before the wedding, Vincent made his final, fatal mistake. "Olivia," he said during dinner, his tone taking on that condescending tone I had learned to loathe. "I have to tell you something about the reception." I looked up from my plate and tried to express all the innocent curiosity inside me. "So what?" "I invited Cassidy," he said, studying my face closely. "She's been a huge help with the business, and I thought it would be nice to include her in the celebration." I was breathless at the audacity. He was bringing his mistress to our son's wedding, setting the stage for maximum cruelty, and he was asking for my permission first. The old Olivia would have questioned this, maybe even objected, but the new Olivia, who had been plotting her revenge for weeks, just smiled. "Of course," I said. "That's very thoughtful of you. He works very hard." Vincent's face as if he'd expected more resistance, but then his expression shifted to one of smug satisfaction. He thought he'd crushed me so completely that I couldn't even fight for my own honor. "Good," he said. "I knew you'd understand." That night, I finalized every detail of my plan. The envelope was prepared, the legal paperwork was filed and prepared, the evidence was organized and documented. I even rehearsed my response in the mirror, perfecting the calm, graceful demeanor that would surprise everyone, because I'd realized something very important about revenge. The sweetest thing is not to get angry, but to maintain perfect control while your enemy destroys himself. Nathan's wedding. I woke up with a feeling I hadn't felt in months. True peace. I wore the navy blue dress that made me feel confident and strong, and I did my makeup with extra care. Today wasn't just my son's wedding day. It was the day I took my life back. As he got ready, Vincent was unusually cheerful, humming as he shaved, taking extra time to improve his appearance. He thought today was his victory lap, the day he would get rid of his boring wife, who who had served her purpose and could now be replaced by a newer model. At the reception, I saw him whisper something to Cassidy, which made her laugh, probably telling her how easy this was going to be. How I never would have guessed. I smiled and waved to those across the room, playing my part until the very last moment. When Vincent stood up to make his announcement, when he looked at me with that mixture of pity and cruelty in his eyes, when he delivered his prepared speech about our marriage being over, all I felt was a cold sense of satisfaction. He thought he was going to destroy me. Instead, he walked right into the trap I'd spent 6 weeks preparing. Every word he said, every brutal revelation, every moment he made me relive in front of our family made the contents of that envelope even more devastating. Because while Vincent was planning a public execution, I was preparing a resurrection that would make him scream. I leaned forward, looked Vincent in the eyes, and said in the calmest voice I could muster, "Okay, Vincent. Thanks for the heads up." The manila envelope I'd been carrying around for weeks, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward her. "Here's a little something for you to read later." Before I even touched that envelope, I stood up, straightened the navy blue dress I had bought specially for this special day, kissed my son Nathan on the forehead, and left the reception hall with my head held high. Behind me, I heard Vincent tear the envelope. Then came the sound that still gives me goosebumps to this day. A scream so loud, so filled with rage and panic, it echoed throughout the banquet hall. As I was halfway to the parking lot, I heard a roar of pure rage and panic that ripped through the evening air like a wounded animal. Through the windows of the reception hall, I could see Vincent standing at our table, the manila envelope in his hand torn, the papers scattered like fallen leaves across the white tablecloth. All the color had drained from his face. The confident, arrogant expression he'd worn during his explanation was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen before. True terror. His hands trembled as he leafed through the documents, his eyes scanning the legal documents with mounting horror. Cassidy leaned forward, trying to read over her shoulder, her perfectly manicured fingers reaching for the divorce papers. "Vincent, what is this?" he asked, his voice piercing the stunned silence of the reception hall. Statements that showed every penny he'd stolen from our joint accounts, every dollar he'd diverted to his secret accounts, every purchase he'd made for her with money that belonged to both of us. "Vincent." Cassidy's voice was sharper now, more demanding. She took a piece of paper from his trembling hands and began to read. Through the window, I watched his expression shift from shock to disbelief to cold, calculating panic. She was reading the adultery clause in our prenuptial agreement, the clause that voided all financial protections. The moment Vincent committed adultery, the clause that expressed everything she thought she had secured for their future together was now in my hands. "This can't be real," Cassidy said, her voice so loud even the nearest tables could hear every word. "You said he would never fight back. You said he was too weak, too dependent. So weak, so dependent." Those words confirmed everything I'd suspected about their conversations. They were sitting in that secret apartment I'd paid for, mocking me, plotting to humiliate me, convinced I was too exhausted to defend myself. Vincent finally found his voice, but it was a hoarse whisper that gradually grew into a shout. "He knew," she said. "He knew everything. He was planning this." The family members at nearby tables were beginning to realize that something terrible had happened. Nathan rose from the head table, his face bewildered and worried. "Dad, what's going on?" But Vincent no longer cared about appearances. He held up the divorce papers, his voice cracking with despair. "She filed for divorce this morning. She's alleging adultery. She's trying to take everything. Take everything." Cassidy's voice rose to match his. "What do you mean? Take everything? You said the prenup protects your assets. The prenup is void." Vincent shouted so loudly that the entire reception hall fell silent. "The adultery clause voids all of this. He gets the house, the investments, everything." Cassidy's face go through a series of emotions. Shock, anger, and then something disturbingly like calculation. He wasn't devastated by the discovery of their affair. He was furious that the money had run out. "You said you filed taxes," Cassidy hissed. "You said you were too stupid to understand finances. You said you'd never figure out the math. The bill?" He was talking about it in front of everyone, confirming every suspicion our parents had about their relationship. Nathan was on his feet, his new wife, Elena, beside him, both of them staring at Vincent with mounting horror. My sister, Rachel, had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Elena's family looked like they wanted to collapse, but Vincent and Cassidy were in such a panicked state that they didn't care about the crowd they'd created. They were attacking each other like cornered animals, each trying to blame the other for their situation. "You said you were in control," Cassidy shouted. "You said you were devastated, that you would never fight back." "I thought so," Vincent replied. He didn't question anything. He didn't even look at the statements. Frankly, he was. Cassidy's voice was pure venom now. "So what happens now?" "We have nothing. The lease is in my name. Your credit cards are maxed out. You said you'd take care of everything." Lovers torn apart by circumstances. They were two greedy people who plotted to steal my life and got caught. "He froze the accounts," Vincent said, reading through the rest of the legal paperwork. "Everything is frozen during the divorce process. We can't access anything." Cassidy stood up so quickly her chair toppled over. "We can't access anything. What about the apartment? What about my car payment? What about what?" He stopped mid-sentence. The truth hit him all at once. Without access to Vincent's money, my money he'd stolen, he had nothing. His lifestyle, his security, his future with it. Everything depended on money that no longer existed. Vincent at that moment was pure hatred. "You ruined everything," she said, her voice as cold as winter. "You're such an idiot." And then he walked away. He just walked out. No farewell. No effort to overcome the crisis together. No declaration of love that would endure financial hardship. She snatched her bag and left. Vincent standing there alone with the wreckage of his choices. The silence that followed was deafening. 62 people stared at my husband as he stood amidst the scattered papers of his devastation. He finally understood that the quiet, reliable wife he had taken for granted had brought him down with her own actions. Nathan's voice pierced the silence, quiet but carrying throughout the room. "Dad, how could you do this to Mom?" But Vincent had no answers. He was still poring over legal documents, trying to comprehend how the woman he had dismissed as weak and foolish had so destroyed him that even his mistress had abandoned him. That's when he started screaming my name. "Olivia, Olivia." Vincent's voice cracked as he shouted my name across the parking lot. "Come back! We need to talk." I stopped walking and slowly turned around, taking my time. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the reception hall, I could see the chaos within. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, family members chattering in bewilderment, and my husband standing in the middle of it all, like a man whose house was burning around him. When I walked back through those doors, the entire room fell silent. 62 pairs of eyes followed my movements as I calmly made my way to our table, surrounded by evidence of Vincent's betrayal. "You wanted to talk," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "Let's talk." Vincent's face was red and blotchy, his flawless hair disheveled from running his hands through it. The confident man who had made the announcement 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone desperate and panicked. "You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "Not like this. Not in front of everyone." I looked around the room at our family and friends who had known us for decades, who had celebrated our anniversary parties and holiday dinners, who believed we had a solid, loving marriage. "You picked the venue," I said simply. "I thought you wanted everyone to see your big announcement." Nathan approached our table, his face pale but determined. "Mom, what's going on? Your dad says you're filing for divorce." I nodded and reached into my bag for the folder I'd prepared just for this moment. "I applied this morning, dear. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But your father made that choice when he decided to ruin our marriage at the wedding dinner." "This is crazy," Vincent said, grabbing my arm. "You're being spiteful. You're trying to destroy me with a midlife crisis." I looked at his hand on my arm, then back to his face. "Take your hand off," I said quietly. Now, something in my tone immediately put him off. "Midlife crisis." I opened my binder and pulled out the bank statements. "Are you trying to steal $55,000 from our retirement account to fund your own relationship?" A gasp echoed through the room. My sister, Rachel, approached me, her eyes wide as she stared at the papers in my hands. "Were you monitoring our accounts?" Vincent's voice was growing louder, more desperate. "This is an invasion of privacy." "That's my job," I interrupted. I work, remember? Tracking financial irregularities is literally how I make my living. Diana Foster chose that moment to walk through the reception hall doors. I had invited her here because I knew I might need legal support for this conversation. Miss Campbell, Diana said with professional calm, approaching our table. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just in time, I said. Diana, this is my husband, Vincent. Vincent, I'm Diana Foster, my lawyer. Vincent's face turned pale again. A lawyer? You hired a lawyer without telling me? Just like you opened secret bank accounts without telling me, I replied. Diana, can you explain to my husband what happens to someone who violates the adultery clause in their prenuptial agreement? Diana smiled, not warmly, but with professional satisfaction. Of course, Mr. Campbell, when you signed your prenuptial agreement 28 years ago, you included a fidelity clause that voided most asset protections. In the event of adultery, your wife has documented evidence of your affair, including financial records showing you used marital assets to support another woman. This can't be legal. Vincent's voice had lost all its fight. It's perfectly legal, Diana continued. In fact, it's exactly what you envisioned. The prenup was your idea, your language, your protection. You never imagined it could be used against you. Nathan was reading the bank statements now. His expression darkened with each line. Dad, you stole money from Mom's retirement account. You used her money to pay for your affair. This isn't theft, Vincent said weakly. This is marital property. I had every right to it. Did you have the right to use our joint money to buy jewelry for another woman? Paying for weekend trips? I didn't know anything about putting a down payment on an apartment for your secretary. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Uncle Marcus shook his head in disgust. Elena's parents were ashamed to have witnessed this family collapse. Where is Cassidy now? I asked, looking around the room. Your partner in this great love? The woman who will make you so much happier than I ever could. Vincent's silence was answer enough. Nathan said quietly. He left the moment he realized the money was gone. I nodded. That tells you everything you need to know about what your relationship is really about. Olivia, please, Vincent said, and for the first time, his voice held genuine desperation rather than anger. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I looked at the men I had been married to for 28 years. This stranger who systematically betrayed and stole from me as I slept next to him every night. And I felt only a cold certainty. You're right about one thing. You were wrong. You thought I was too weak, too stupid, too dependent to resist. You were wrong. I gathered my paperwork and put it back in my file. The accounts have been frozen until the divorce is finalized. You will be contacting my lawyer to discuss the division of assets and the theft charges we are considering. As he was about to leave, Vincent made one last desperate attempt. You can't have everything. I built that business. I made that money. I stopped and took one last look at him. With my credit, my unpaid labor, and my financial support, I said. And now you will learn exactly how valuable it is. That reception hall for the second time. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete and utter control over my own life. Behind me, I could hear Vincent still trying to explain himself to our son, still trying to downplay what he had done, still trying to play the victim. But no one was listening anymore. 6 months later, on our 29th wedding anniversary, I was in the office of my new consulting firm, working on a client's company growth strategy. I specialized in financial consulting and tax planning for small businesses. While celebrating 50 years of successful businesses, I also realized the irony of my marriage collapsing after 28 years of lies. The divorce had been finalized 4 weeks earlier, and the results were even better than Diana had anticipated. The adultery clause in Vincent's precious prenuptial agreement had worked exactly as written, nullifying any protection she thought she had. I kept the house, 78% of our investments, the retirement accounts he tried to steal, and received spousal support for the next 6 years. But the real victory wasn't financial. He was watching the dominoes of his carefully constructed deception fall one by one. Cassidy lasted a full 2 weeks after the wedding disaster. Realizing Vincent's money was gone and not coming back, she cleared out their secret apartment and moved in with another man before the month was out. According to mutual acquaintances, her new lover was an entrepreneur with a much larger bankroll, and no annoying wives to complicate matters. Vincent had initially tried to fight the divorce, hiring an expensive lawyer who reviewed the prenuptial agreement and advised him to settle immediately. The systematic theft, bank statements, photos of him with Cassidy, and paper trail of lies made his case impossible. His proud business was now struggling. Without my free accounting and financial management services, and with its reputation ruined by reports of theft and affairs, clients were looking elsewhere for their real estate needs. He had to sell his stake to his business partner to cover legal fees. The potential fraud charges Diana mentioned never materialized. I decided it was enough to ruin his life without sending him to prison. Sometimes compassion means allowing someone to face the natural consequences of the choices they make, without imposing additional punishment. Nathan had struggled with the revelation about his father, but made his stance clear the week after the wedding. "Mom," he had said, sitting in my kitchen as I made him his favorite hazelnut cookies, "I'm sorry I didn't see what you did to you. I'm sorry it took someone this long to defend you. You didn't have to protect me." I told him that was never his job. My son inherited my sense of justice and his father's stubbornness, but he channeled them. After learning of the stolen retirement money, he cut off all contact with Vincent, saying he couldn't respect a man who stole from his wife. My new bride, Elena, had become one of my closest allies. She helped me design a logo for my consulting business and became my first official client by hiring me to provide financial advice for her law firm's annual strategic planning meeting. Word of mouth from that event led to 5 more bookings, then 8, then 15. My consulting business had become everything I'd dreamed of 28 years ago. I specialized in financial planning and tax strategy for small businesses, providing consulting services that gave people the tools to grow their businesses and achieve financial freedom. My financial analysis reports became legendary among my clients. My tax optimization efforts were in full swing throughout the spring. I even started teaching monthly financial literacy classes to teenagers. But the best part wasn't the success, money, or satisfaction of building something with my own 2 hands. The best part was waking up every morning knowing that every choice I made was my own. Every dollar I earned was mine, and every dream I pursued was mine alone. In those months as I plotted my revenge, I learned something crucial about myself. Patience and intelligence always triumph over impulse and emotion. Vincent had acted out of greed and selfishness, making decisions based on impulse. I had acted out of strategy and self-respect, devising a plan that would protect my future rather than satisfy my anger. The difference between us was that he saw our marriage as something to be escaped from, while I saw it as something to be fought for until he could prove it wasn't worth saving. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Vincent. He was living in a studio apartment across town, working for someone else's real estate agency, and apparently feeling sorry for himself. "Olivia," he said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it before, "I made terrible mistakes. I know I can't undo them, but maybe we can talk. Maybe there's a way to fix this." I listened to his entire speech, his apologies, his excuses, his promises that he had changed. When he finished, I said one thing: "I hope you find happiness, Vincent, but you won't find it with me." That was the last conversation we had. Now, as I put the finishing touches on my client's financial report, I thought about how much my life had changed. I owned a successful business, lived in a beautiful home all to myself, and woke up each day excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. I had the love and respect of my son, true friendships with people who valued me for who I was, and dreams that were uniquely mine. If you're watching this and feeling betrayed by someone you trusted, remember this: sometimes the best revenge isn't no revenge, it's acquittal. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemy, but in building a life so beautiful that their betrayal will hurt you. It's the catalyst for your greatest happiness. Use their own weapons against them if necessary, but don't let their choices dictate your future. The person who betrayed you has shown you exactly who they are. Believe them, learn from them, and then build something better without them. I never imagined the worst day of my marriage would be the first day of my real life. But that's exactly what happened when my husband announced our end at our son's wedding dinner, and I handed him an envelope that changed everything. Sometimes justice tastes like financial independence, smells like your own office, and sounds like your own laughter echoing through a home that is finally yours. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If the story made you feel something, give us a like. Thank you so much for your sweet support. This story taught me one thing: good people don't lose. They are just tested. Sometimes the harshest punishment is not given by the court, but by conscience. Every ending signals a new beginning, and maybe that was for the best. Do you think what happened can be forgiven? I'm waiting for your opinions in the comments. The story below. You'll find 2 new life stories I highly recommend. There are many more on my channel. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to continue sharing stories like this.